Hello, I'm talking about Stanley Fish for a few minutes, and the essay is in the Richter anthology. I have realized that some of you have different editions of the anthology. The PDF versions, if you're looking at that, has different page numbers than this edition. On this edition, it starts on 596. I think the essays are identical in any edition you might be looking at. It's called How to Recognize a Poem When You See One, and it was written in 1980. It's a response to the new critics, which I talked about when I talked about reader-oriented theories. And Stanley Fish is one of the most famous reader-oriented critics around. He is famous for a lot of things, but one of the things that we're going to be talking today is sort of sideways to this essay. So I'll show you where it comes up, even though he doesn't use the phrase as strongly as he does elsewhere. And that phrase is interpretive communities, which I mentioned in the other video as well. Fish's argument, and he spends the first couple of pages talking about this experiment he did with his classes. I'm less interested in that. His argument really begins at the bottom of 598, top of 599, where he starts to talk about the fact that when we say something is a poem, what we mean is that we've been trained to look at something in a particular way and decide that it's a poem. So one way to think about this would be to say that if I showed Jameson a piece of text, something like Kubla Khan, and asked him what it was, he wouldn't necessarily tell me it was a poem right away. He might say it was a story, for example. If I showed it to someone in some other environment, maybe the person would say it didn't mean anything, it wasn't intelligible, it was just a bunch of words on the page, for example. And Fish wants to point out that those are different ways of responding to exactly the same text. And I'm even oversimplifying it for the moment, but let's say, bringing in interpretive communities before Fish does, that I, Emily, belong to an interpretive community where I can read Kubla Khan as this poem that's sort of a weird combination between lyric and narrative. And Jameson reads it as a story because it seems to tell us these things that happen. And someone else reads it as neither because it doesn't make a lot of sense on a first reading and thus might not reward interpretation. We might say that those are three distinct interpretive communities. And it's not just clear that mine is better than Jameson's or some other person's. The new critics would say that theirs is best, and they knew it. And they're going to show you how to agree with them when they read Kubla Khan. And reader-oriented critics, like Fish, are going to say, yours is best because why? And these different interpretive communities have learned to find words on the page and understand them, according to Fish here, as different genres, so that I'm confident that Kubla Khan is a poem. Why? Because someone told me it was. Because I know Coleridge wrote poetry. Because the lines end at particular places. It has formal qualities that I expect to see in poems. Jameson might think it's a story because it has formal properties that he expects to find in stories, like causality and characters. What is remarkable about Fish's argument is that he's saying on the bottom of 598, that acts of recognition, I recognize Kubla Khan as a poem, rather than being triggered by formal characteristics, things in the poem show me that it's a poem, are their source. It's not that the presence of poetic qualities compels a certain kind of attention. It's not that I notice things are poetic and then I start to read it as a poem, but that the paying of a certain kind of attention results in the emergence of poetic qualities. Because I am determined to read it as a poem, I will find in it symbolism, rhyme, alliteration, imagery, defamiliarization, literary techniques that I am confident belong in this thing that I have decided will be a poem. He goes on to say, I'll skip that quotation because I keep trying to make these 5 minutes and they're never even close. He goes on to say that we do that not even just about poetry, but we do it all the time. Like we do it when I give you a syllabus, or we do it when you see this video and decide that I am teaching you, or that we have an assignment or are at college. That these things seem obvious to us, what it is that we're doing, what a piece of paper means, what it is that someone's communicating, what it means when we're in a Zoom classroom and I get to talk whenever I want to, but you have to raise your hands. Like all of those things seem obvious to us because we understand what it means to be in college, for example. But it's obvious to us only because we have learned to find those things there and learned so well that it seems like they are just clearly an assignment or a syllabus or an arrangement, a power arrangement between professor and students. Just the way we've learned so well that a poem is something that contains all of these markers, whereas actually it's our own judgment that's finding all of that stuff in the poem. This is the example that he starts out with, that his students make it into a poem because someone tells them that it is. That I make Kubla Khan into a poem because I am determined to. Okay.